Hello everyone, my name is Garvin and I read things and prattle on about them on the internet for your entertainment. Before I begin, a quick disclaimer. Brick Cave Media, the publishers of the work that I'm going to be discussing today, are members of my Patron, where they donate $1 a month. On top of that, they gave me a copy of this book for free. Now, everything I'm going to talk about is my honest opinion, but I want to be upfront and honest with you, my viewers, and just tell you where these attachments might be. By the way, since we're talking about patrons, you can join my Everwise patrons for as little as $1 a month by clicking on the link in the description below and get access to bonus content, get to vote in polls of upcoming content as well. Of course, you don't have to be a patron to support this channel. You can also support just by subscribing, sharing, liking, or commenting on the video, as that helps me in my eternal struggle against the Dread Lord algorithm. Terror be on his name. But let's not give too much attention to the Dread Lord. Let's instead turn to the reason we're here, The War Golem, a fantasy novel by Mr. JA Giunta. The War Golem is a Portal fantasy story, or for you anime fans out there, an isekai. For those of you unfamiliar with that, the premise of that story is someone from our world gets transported to a fantasy world and hilarity ensues. In this case, the hilarity is our main character, Eric, getting summoned and murdered by an army of goblins and then having his soul stuffed into an indestructible war machine. The War Golem in the title. This does not go as planned for the goblins, though, because instead of just providing a sort of mode, if you will, for the golem to understand and follow orders through, Eric's consciousness is still in full awareness and quickly gains control of the golem. And as you can imagine, he's a bit upset about the whole being kidnapped, murdered, and soul-jacked thing. And who can blame him? I think we all be a little upset too. You're trying to relax, you go to sleep, you wake up, and you're in a giant star metal body, and you can see your dead body over there with your throat slit. You'd be upset, let's be honest. This whole thing kind of comes across as a bit of a botch, since the goblins were aiming to summon forth a bloodthirsty mass murderer, and instead they got Eric, whose biggest sins is that he's an online troll and a griefer gamer. Let me explain what a griefer gamer is. I'm pretty sure if you're listening to this on YouTube, you know what an online troll is. A griefer gamer is a type of video game player that gets their enjoyment mostly by wrecking other people's fun. These are the kind of people who go into, massive online games and make a point to screw over other players. They're not popular. On top of that, most of the griefers I've seen are bullies who like to focus on new players, and that doesn't really endear them to me either. That's not, however, the focus of this story. The focus is mainly on Eric growing from a self-centered brat into a fairly mature human being who is going to at least try to do right by the people around him. Now, I get into greater detail in the written review linked below, but let me just say I thought that was an amazingly well-written character arc, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I would recommend it to anyone who really likes these types of character arcs. It's well done. The goblins themselves are pretty interesting, because they could have been one-note villains, but instead, Mr. Junta decides to make them a complex and layered people in society. And because these are the people Eric spends the most time with in the book, these are the people we get to know best in the story. And there's some interesting things here. Now, before I get into it, fair warning, there are going to be some minor spoilers here. Goblins are artificially created creatures made through an alchemical process using metals, arcane materials, and the blood and souls of murdered creatures to create more goblins. It doesn't necessarily have to be sapient creatures, as we see intelligent goblins in the story are made through the sacrifice of horses, for example, but the dialogue in the story does lead me to believe that intelligent creatures do get thrown into the goblin pot to make higher orders of goblins. I say that because the goblins exist in a caste society that is, of course, color coded. Yay. So at the bottom you have grays, who are basically subsapient and fit only for manual labor. Then you have browns, who are craftsmen and engineers, and some of them can learn magic. Then you have other goblins like reds, who are frontline troopers, greens are scouts and hunters, so on and so forth. This is also paired with the fact that goblins aren't from the planet the story takes place on, but are in fact an invading army sent from their homeworld, exclusively populated by goblins. So, on top of everything else, these goblins are actual aliens with a truly alien mindset, and I like that. Because goblins don't have a childhood. They have a brief educational period, and then they're thrown into whatever job their skin color dictates they're good at. I Look, I'm really uncomfortable at the color coding here. Uh, it's very clearly meant as a video game homage, so I don't think I should dig too deep on that because sometimes the curtains are just blue, but it's just like, oh, here's a caste system dictated by their skin color, and it's just like, oh boy, that's got some interesting real world parallels, right? Um, but let me get back to it. So they also don't have biological families, which makes sense given their creation process, but they're organized into houses that serve much the same purpose as a family. Your house, covers your education, make sure you have enough to eat, make sure you have clothes and a place to sleep. Uh, they also run your educational period, so you're socialized to have an intense loyalty to your house. Uh, Imagine it's like the loyalty you would feel to your hometown, assuming you love your hometown and your hometown loves you back. But this lacks the individual bonds that make up a family. So the goblins aren't portrayed as these callous monsters. They're people who can form friendships and care for one another, but since they don't have biological urges the same way we do, and they don't have children, a lot of our more intense pair connections or other sort of relationships just make no sense to them, and they just think it's weird. And the goblins also have a list of grievances. They were enslaved by the dwarves, and they've never really gotten over that. Now, that said, the goblins are not portrayed as innocent angels here, and you should not think of them as such. Although they often take very great pains to present themselves as innocent and wrong to Eric, which makes sense because Eric is walking around in a 10-foot tall war machine immune to conventional weapons. They declare themselves more honest and loyal than humans, even though they use greys and other lower ranked goblins as expendable assets. They decry the evils that other races, such as the dwarves, have done while invading their homes and murdering them in their sleep. Now, at the same time, there is a grain of truth in the goblins' observations. I just find their announcements of moral superiority somewhat suspect and self serving. And I'm pretty sure I'm supposed to, honestly, because the book never tries to justify their screwed up actions in the narrative. These explanations are given to us by the characters as they try to convince Eric that they have done nothing wrong. And that makes perfect sense in the story, so I'm okay with that. If this book had focused on Eric and the goblins, it would have easily been a B or a B plus, but it also interjects a bunch of other groups that don't receive any real screen time, so to speak, or get any real exploration into them. And there's at least two or three organizations and groups of people that felt surplus to requirements to me. Plus, the end villain just wasn't very compelling due to the lack of time to develop him. He kind of just shows up in like the last quarter, last third of the book, and I'm like, oh, I guess we're doing this now. Uh, to boil this down, I feel this would have been better off if the story had been cut into 2 or even 3 books, so that the first book would have been Eric and the Goblins. Then the second book would have let us explore these other groups coming in that Eric and the Goblins have to deal with. And then the last book would have been that final villain and Eric's big epic showdown. As it is, all of this crammed into a book under 250 pages, just nothing feels like it has space to breathe. That's just my opinion, though. And I'll admit, it's kind of funny at a certain level for me to say that, because I also complain a lot about series being bloated and needing to be cut down. Wheel of Time, for example. That's right, I said it and I meant it. But, sorry, back to the topic at hand. What the book does get to spend time on, it does really well. So it's a good story that suffers from just a little too much being piled onto it, in my view. I encourage you to read the review below, and if this sounds like something interesting, please go ahead and give it a shot, because you might get more out of it than I do. I'm going to stop right here and just suggest for further information you read my written review. I'm trying to keep this video relatively short as I'm kind of recovering a bit from Hot Atlanta's summer. I would like to thank everyone who has subscribed over the last 5 months or so. When I started Hot Atlanta's summer, I was at around 40 subscribers. At the time of this recording, I am at over 200 subscribers. So thank you to everyone who has subscribed. Thank you to everyone who is going to subscribe. And I hope I can convince you to stick with me. Special thanks, of course, goes to Big Steve, who is my largest supporter. Could not have done this without you, man, as well as all the people who guest starred in the videos, helping me generate more content for you, my loyal viewers. Next week, we're doing one more book review before jumping into real lost cities that have been rediscovered. I hope to see you there, but until then, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and of course, keep reading.